People think that by the time you hit 72, life slows down, that excitement is just a memory. Well, I've got news for you, life is what you make of it. And me? I decided to make mine interesting. So, when I asked my gardener to do this one thing with me, I knew it would raise a few eyebrows. But even I couldn't have predicted the chaos that followed. If you think you've heard it all, think again. Trust me, this is a story you won't want to miss. I'm Margaret, widow, mother of 3, and an expert at minding my own business, until I don't. Now, I've led a quiet life, some might even say it's a bit too predictable. My days usually revolve around my garden, a cup of tea, and making sure everything's in order. But let's be honest, sometimes that kind of life can get a little dull. I needed a change, something to shake things up. Then came Daniel. He wasn't your average gardener. Oh, he was good with plants, better than most, really. But it wasn't just that. He had this way of making even the most boring tasks seem entertaining. He'd show up every Tuesday, and by the end of the day, I'd find myself laughing at things I never thought were funny. Most gardeners come, do their work, and leave without a word. But Daniel? He stayed a bit longer, always with a new story or some witty comment that brightened up my day. He didn't just tend to the roses, he tended to my boredom too. And that's when it hit me, maybe it was time to take things in a different direction. I walked right up to him and said, "You're having lunch with me today." The poor boy didn't know what hit him. He looked at me, a bit taken aback, as if wondering if I was serious. But I wasn't backing down. I told him, "You've been working in my garden for weeks, and I think it's time we got to know each other a little better." He agreed, though I could see he was still trying to figure out if this was some kind of joke. Our first lunch was, well, interesting. We sat outside on the patio, and I made us both sandwiches, nothing fancy, just some turkey and cheese. But the conversation? That was something else. Daniel was so open, so honest, almost like he didn't have a filter. He told me about his childhood, his dreams, and how he got into gardening in the first place. It was refreshing, really. And I have to admit, I found myself enjoying his company more than I thought I would. He didn't try to impress me, didn't sugarcoat anything. He was just himself. At one point, he even cracked a joke about how his first attempt at gardening was a disaster. I couldn't help but laugh. He had this way of making even the most embarrassing stories sound charming. As we ate, I realized how rare it was to have someone be so genuine, especially in a world where everyone seemed to put on a mask. Daniel wasn't trying to be someone he wasn't. And that's what made me want to spend more time with him. People started talking, "Why is she spending so much time with that young man?" Honestly, I found it amusing. In a small town like mine, word travels fast. The neighbors weren't shy about it, either. You could see them peeking out from behind their curtains, whispering to each other as I'd walk down the street with Daniel or sit with him on the patio for lunch. They couldn't quite figure it out. They'd exchange looks, wondering what exactly was going on between the two of us. But you know what? I wasn't bothered by it. In fact, I thought it was kind of funny. Let them talk, I figured. People talk about what they don't understand. Daniel and I had become good friends, and our time together became the highlight of my week. We would sit, laugh, and share stories like old friends, despite the age gap. But the more time I spent with him, the more I realized how much I enjoyed his company. I found myself looking forward to our meetings, to the simple moments we shared. The connection felt natural, easy. But as much as I appreciated his friendship, there was something more I needed from him. One afternoon, as we were wrapping up lunch, I decided to make a request, a simple one, but one that I knew would shake things up. Daniel had always been so agreeable, but this would be different. It would push the boundaries, and I knew it might make things awkward, but I didn't care. I wasn't one to shy away from what I wanted. "Daniel," I said, pausing to make sure he was listening. "I've been thinking about this for a while, and I've decided it's time. I need your help with something a little unconventional." He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and caution. You could tell he was trying to figure out where I was going with this, but he was too polite to interrupt. His brow furrowed slightly as I continued. "I want you to stay the night," I said, without hesitation. "I've got a project in mind, and I could really use your help. It's something that will take a few hours, and I won't be able to do it alone." The moment I said it, I saw his face shift. His eyes widened in surprise, and for the first time, he looked genuinely unsure. I could tell he didn't know how to respond, but he didn't say no right away. Instead, he sat there, a bit frozen, as if he was trying to process what I had just asked. I could feel the tension building. His silence hung in the air, and the atmosphere suddenly felt heavier than it had been before. I didn't want to pressure him, so I tried to lighten the moment with a laugh. "It's nothing big," I said, "just a little help with a project I've been meaning to finish." But even as I said it, I knew this request wasn't as simple as it seemed. The way he looked at me, like I'd just thrown him a curveball, told me everything. I could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that whatever happened next would change the dynamic between us. But I also knew this was the moment where everything could either stay the same or take a turn I hadn't even seen coming. One day, I asked him to do something I hadn't done. In years, I asked him to dance with me, right there in the garden. Why? Because I could. And because I knew it would drive my nosy neighbors mad. I could practically hear them talking already. "Did you see Margaret? Dancing in the garden with that young man? What on earth is going on there?" It was the kind of thing that made me laugh, just imagining their reactions. Who says you can't have a little fun, right? I could see Daniel hesitate. His eyes darted around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. You could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. He was a good sport, but dancing wasn't exactly something he was used to, at least, not in a garden, with someone his mother's age. But then, as if he decided to just go with it, he gave me a half smile and said, "If you can keep up, I'm in." And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about dancing, it was about showing him that age was just a number, and I wasn't going to let it stop me from having a little fun. So, I took a deep breath, threw my shoulders back, and showed him I still had moves. I didn't care that my steps were a little slower or that I hadn't danced in years. I was in the moment, and nothing was going to stop me from enjoying it. As the music played, I swayed and twirled, and to my surprise, Daniel kept up. In fact, he even laughed and tried a few moves of his own. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made it unforgettable. And of course, I could hear the faint rustle of curtains from next door. I'm sure the neighbors were having a field day, but I didn't care. I was having fun, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly alive. I wasn't just Margaret, the quiet widow down the street, I was someone who could still surprise herself, and everyone around her. The neighbors went from whispering to full-on gossiping. You could practically hear them murmuring as I walked by, "Did you see her? Out there dancing with that young man, of all people." Someone even had the audacity to come up to me one afternoon and asked, "Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I mean, who did they think they were? I shot them a look and said, "I'm too busy having fun to be ashamed." They didn't know how to respond to that, but I could see the judgment in their eyes. Let them judge. Let them gossip. I wasn't going to let it ruin my day. Honestly, I wasn't bothered at all. There they were, peeking through their curtains like they were waiting for the next scandal to drop in their quiet little neighborhood. They had nothing better to do than talk about what I was doing, so I gave them something to really chew on. But the funny part? They couldn't get enough. The more they gossiped, the more Daniel and I leaned into the chaos. We weren't doing anything wrong, we were just living life on our terms, and the neighbors couldn't handle it. At first, Daniel was still a little cautious. He'd look around before speaking in public, as if waiting for the town's gossip machine to catch wind of our little escapades. He'd look over his shoulder when we'd walk down the street or make sure no one was watching when we'd share a laugh at the local cafe. It was almost like he still had that hesitation to fully embrace what we were doing. But after a while, something shifted. The longer we spent together, the more Daniel started to get into the rhythm of this little game we were playing. The fun, the unpredictability, it was addictive. One afternoon, we were sitting in the garden after our usual lunch. I'd just finished telling him about the latest round of gossip from the neighbors. Daniel looked at me, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and mischief. "You know," he said, "we should really give them something to talk about. Something that'll really drive them wild." I laughed. "What do you mean?" He leaned in, grinning. "I'm not sure yet. But I think we could do something outrageous, that'll make them lose their minds." That was when I realized this wasn't just about a harmless lunch anymore. Daniel was really in. He wasn't just a participant in my little rebellion against the small-town boredom, he was starting to enjoy the thrill of it. It was like we'd created a little world of our own, where nothing was too outrageous, and nothing was off-limits. And the more we leaned into that, the more the neighbors noticed. They were watching, judging, and whispering, but that only made the whole thing more fun. Daniel and I were a team now, and we weren't backing down. The fallout from that day? It didn't stop us, it only pushed us further. As soon as I saw how much Daniel had embraced the madness, I knew this wouldn't be the last time we did something that made the town's gossip mill go into overdrive. No, this was just the beginning. One day, a woman from the neighborhood confronted Daniel out of nowhere. She asked him, with all the seriousness in the world, if he was taking advantage of me. Can you believe that? I couldn't hold back my laugh when Daniel turned to her and, without missing a beat, said, "You should be asking if she's taking advantage of me." I was standing nearby, trying not to burst out laughing. The look on her face? Priceless. For a moment, she just stared at him, her mouth hanging open, as if she didn't know whether to be offended or impressed. And I'll tell you, I wasn't helping things. I crossed my arms, leaned back, and said, "Mind your own garden before you worry about mine." I could see her blood start to boil. That shut her up real quick. She just stood there, sputtering for a moment, completely caught off guard. She had no response, and that was the end of that. As she walked away, I could feel a wave of satisfaction wash over me. It was like, for the first time, I wasn't just the quiet, respectable widow down the street, I was the one with the last word. And Daniel? Well, he couldn't stop grinning. He gave me a wink, and we both laughed. The drama that followed? It didn't faze us one bit. I knew, right then, that this wasn't just some silly little fling or a phase. It was something more, something that had shaken up the boring routine of the small town. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving, having a laugh at the expense of all the people who thought they could control us or judge us. And I wasn't going to stop. After all, life's too short to let other people dictate your fun, especially when you've got nothing to be ashamed of. So, the next time someone asks you if you're doing something shameful, remember this: it's only shameful if you let it be. And trust me, I wasn't about to let anyone rain on my parade. Some people waste their lives worrying about what others think. They spend their time fretting about the opinions of strangers, letting fear hold them back from doing what they really want. Me? I dance in my garden with whoever I please, and I couldn't care less about the whispers behind my back. So, the next time you're scared of what people might say, remember my story, and do it anyway. Because at the end of the day, it's your life, and you're the only one who should be calling the shots. And for those of you still shaking your heads, well, let me tell you, there's a lot more joy to be found in defying the norm than trying to fit into it. I'm not here to please anyone but myself, and I suggest you try it, too. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a garden to tend and a reputation to maintain. But don't worry, I'm not about to slow down anytime soon. If you enjoyed my little story, there's plenty more where that came from. Trust me, I'm just getting started. So, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, stick around, because you never know what I'll do next. One thing's for sure, though, it'll be worth your time. Now, if you'll excuse me, my garden's waiting, and I've got a few more surprises up my sleeve.